So the whole story of water transport is like this. It's driven by the events happening at the leaf. Consider these mesophyll cells in the leaf. They are continuously losing water by transpiration. And this happened to every mesophyll cells. So let's say I consider this one instead. So you now understand every mesophyll cell lose water like this. So my next question is, what happened to this particular cell? As the water is lost from this cell, you can imagine the water potential of this cell would decrease. So what happened next? So this happened. What does this arrow represent? This arrow represents osmosis. So meaning that water will move from the neighboring cell into this particular mesophyll cell. So what happened next? So you can imagine, so don't copy it now. I'll correct it. So stop copying at this moment, just watch. So you can imagine this particular the water potential of this particular cell would decrease as well. Agree? So what happened? So again, water moving from the neighboring cell by osmosis. Water potential decrease again because water is moved. So that's why water will enter the cell by osmosis as well. Agree? So you can imagine this will repeat. Don't copy because eventually I'll summarize. You can imagine this process will repeat and repeat. So it draw water from neighboring cells one by one. Starting from this cell, it lose water, so it draw the water from the neighboring cells one by one. Because every time water potential decrease, and then the osmosis occurs. So when will it lead to? Where will it lead to? Eventually, you can imagine, eventually, there must be a cell that is right next to the xylem. So what's so special about xylem here? It's because the xylem here would be having the highest water potential. Agree? So eventually, the cell will draw water from xylem. Because xylem, which is full of water, right? A continuous water column there with no cytoplasm at all. So those water would be having the highest water potential. So this is how a mesophyll cell, when they lose water, will continue to draw water, draw water, draw water, and eventually it draw water from the xylem. This is what happened. Okay, you don't need to copy, but this is what happened. Okay. So how to describe all these? I don't want to talk about it, repeating my sentence 10 times, right? So what's the common event happening? What's repeating? 2 steps is repeating. Can you tell me? 2 steps are repeating. Every time it draws water from the neighboring cell, water potential decrease, right? Don't copy it. Don't copy it. And then it leads to osmosis. Agree? So instead of describing the cell one by one, I now only consider the highest, the point with highest water potential and the point with the lowest water potential. That is that particular mesophyll cell. And you can imagine this creates a difference in water potential. So I don't repeat individual cells one by one. My overall description would be when any mesophyll cell lose water, their water potential will decrease. So overall speaking, it now creates a water potential gradient all across the leaf, right? From the leaf xylem to the mesophyll cells. And this water potential gradient would draw water from the leaf xylem to different mesophyll cells by osmosis. Understand? What I'm writing now is summarizing this step-by-step process. Okay? Instead of talking about 2 neighboring cells, I talk about the overall pattern. All right? So once the water potential drops in a particular mesophyll cell, it creates a water potential difference. The xylem in the leaf is always having the highest water potential. The mesophyll cell is always having the lowest water potential. And this draw water from the xylem in the leaf into mesophyll cells by osmosis. So it's a step-by-step osmosis, one cell to another, one cell to another, and eventually to this particular mesophyll cell. But of course, it applies to all other mesophyll cells as well, right? So the water can go this way, can go this way. Okay, so draw it now. So now the event is affecting the water in the xylem. Remember, xylem is a hollow tube with a continuous water column inside. So think about it like a straw with water. 有飲管裏面有水. If you move the water on top what will happen to the water inside this column? Can you imagine? Just like you have a straw， 你用飲管飲水，你其實飲緊嘅係飲管最頂嗰橛水啫嘛，係嘛？當你飲走咗飲管，當你吸走咗飲管最頂嗰橛水，下面嘅水會有咩反應咧？咪會跟住向上喐咯，係嘛？ So it draws water up. This particular action, this particular osmosis, move away, draws the water in the xylem. So all the water in the xylem would follow. Because there is a force created to draw the water up. And this particular force is what we call transpiration pull. Now that is the reason how come the water in the xylem can move up. À, 水唔會無啦啦向上行嘅，總要有個力㗎，係咪？有道力拉啲水向上，呢個就係 transpiration pull. It's a pulling force, you can see, right? And it is created due to transpiration. So that's why the force is called transpiration pull. And this will move the water in the xylem upward. Okay, so let's summarize. Overall speaking, our question today is, how come the water would go up against gravity? So there must be a force that moved the water up. So this story illustrates how this upward force is created. So this is the one of the way to create an upward force. All because of transpiration. Okay? But when the water is being pulled, how come the water molecule would follow? So when the water molecule here is pulled away, how come these water molecule would follow? Why do they have to follow? 點解唔係就咁攞上面嘅水？哦，你走啦，我留喺度啊？點解水唔會係咁嘅咧？點解你吸一粒水，其他水會跟住去嘅咧？有冇人答到呢個問題啊？喺 chat box， 我教過嘅之前。All right, so you are correct that it is the attraction between water molecules. Keep the water column continuous, and that force is called cohesion force. So 少一個力都唔得嘅話係嘛？諗下 ，so these two forces together allows or drives the water to be transported upward. This pulling force, also known as tension, is moving the water up, while the cohesion force is ensuring all the water molecules would follow. Is this osmosis? Yes or no? Type in the chat box, send it out now. Is this process osmosis? And why? Why or why not? If you don't know how to explain, just type yes or no first. Is this osmosis? Hi, send it out now. Water, Evelyn, it should be water potential, 係嘛? Gradient. Right, so the idea is that this is not due to water potential gradient. And also there is no membrane in between. So that's why this is not osmosis, but instead, this is a physical force. When there is a suction at the top, all the water follows. So this is not osmosis. This is only a physical force, or if you remember what we teach before, this is just a mass flow, right? So this is one of the reasons how water moves up in the xylem. Okay. And you can see during the whole process, no energy is involved. Now that explains the German scientist's experiment. How come when the whole plant is dead, water is still being drawn upward? As long as transpiration occurs, every other following events would occur as well, right? And transpiration is not something that is caused by activity of a cell. Transpiration is a physical process. Whenever there is heat, water will evaporate and the water vapor will diffuse out, right? So the whole process is physical. It's not because of metabolic reactions or activities of a particular cell. So now turn to this page and fill in the blanks. There are two driving force that will move the water upward. I think what we learned is the first force here is driven by transpiration pull. And this is the main force move the water. All right, go home and fill in this part. Here, just mark down here first. Here, you are going to fill in either the word positive or negative. Here, you're going to put the word pull or push. Okay? So go home and think about it. So there's another force here that is involved. I'll take a video and you watch that video during the weekend and finish page 14 to 15. Okay? So here is either positive or negative. Here is just pull or push. Okay? So you can try to finish the story now, or you can do it at home. Here, remember there's a name of that attraction force. So don't write the word attraction force. So there is a name for that force. And this would be one of the most important story in this chapter and is always being tested in essay. Now, let me continue this video by thinking about another possible driving force that moves the water upward. I'm not going to show here. I'm going to show in the next page. Well, scientists think about there is another possible process that also helps water to move up in the xylem. And that is known as root pressure. Now, from the name, you can see this force is originating from the root itself. While from the name of transpiration pool, you can see that the first force that we discussed originates from the leaf. So it's a top down, all right? Something happening at the upper part, driving the water up. In root pressure, is something happening in the root that's driving the water up. So the first thing that I want to introduce is another structure in the root called endodermis. Well, actually, we have drawn that. I just didn't label it. So you can shift back to this page of the notes. If you remember, I draw a circle around the vascular bundle here, right? So in root, there is actually a special layer of cells surrounding the vascular bundle. And this layer is called endodermis. Endo means 內啊嘛，咁所以唔係 epidermis 咯 ，epi 解外面啊嘛。而家呢浸就叫 endodermis. So this picture only shows the vascular bundle. And you can see that in root, the vascular bundle is surrounded by an endodermis. This layer is special because it carries out two jobs. One of the jobs that we mentioned here is that it actively secretes minerals into the xylem by active transport. So draw it together in your notes. Pause whenever you need some time. So how would it be related to water flow then? It's not pumping water in, it's just secreting minerals in. That's why I'm so angry yesterday when we talk about phloem and somebody mentioned minerals, because mineral is also transported by xylem along the water. Okay, finish this part. Now think about how would this affect the water flow here and also here. So you can pause and think how the active secretion of minerals drive everything else. How would it create or affect water flow here? And how would it affect the water flow here within the xylem? So pause and think. I'm now going to show the answer. When minerals are actively secreted into this xylem, it lowers the water potential inside the root xylem. So what does it mean now? It means that the water would also move in by osmosis. And you can imagine these water comes from the cortex cell by cell, right? So what happened next? Now water builds up in this region, it means. And when the water builds up, it's just like pumping air or water into a balloon. You can imagine this would create a pressure that push the water up. Right? Say that again. When the water enters this root xylem by osmosis, it accumulates and creates a pushing force that push the water up. And this is what we call a root pressure. So now you can understand, together with the transpiration pool here and the root pressure here, both of these forces help to drive the water in the xylem to move upward. Okay, so when you understand this part, fill in the blanks here. But before you leave, I would like you to pay attention to this. Now, overall speaking, we now learn that there are two driving force that drives the transport of water in the xylem. However, I want you to also realize that they play a different level of significance or importance in water transport. Think about root pressure. You have to imagine that this pressure is quite weak. This small change in water potential, this building up of water, is the size of this force is very small. It's very, very small. So this force alone cannot explain why the water can move up so tall. Now, if you remember, we played something like this. If you remember, don't draw it in the notes, just take a look. You remember that we put a dialysis tubing here. Do you remember? There is water here, and there is sucrose solution here. And if you remember the result, You remember that the water goes in, so the water level goes up. But after some time, the water level stopped going up because of the weight of the water itself. So it also means that this driving force is quite weak. Now it's strong enough that force exists. So that's why we need to study root pressure. This is the same as root pressure, agree? It's a pressure due to osmosis. But from the experiment we have in our lab, you can see that the force is quite weak. And it can only push the water up a little. So that's why we say this root pressure only plays an important role in very, very, very small plants, like the mosses on the rocks, 即係嗰啲青苔仔啊。But imagine in normal plants, all right, in the herbs, in the shrubs, 即係你平時行過啲花叢嗰啲花草樹木，甚至你諗下一棵幾十米高嘅樹，你就會明白 root pressure play 緊一個 very very minor role. While most of the water transport is created due to transpiration, it's driven by transpiration pool, and that is the main force there. Okay, this is point number one that I want you to realize. Point number two is that when the water is transported like this all the way to the leaf, you can imagine now this would affect the water potential of epidermis. And you can imagine eventually this would lead to water absorption. So that's why we say water lost by transpiration drives the water transport. And this water transport eventually drives water absorption. So all these are related. Okay, like this, imagine. Okay, and that's the second message that I want you to have in your mind. So go home. So now, after learning all these, finish page 13, page 14, page 15, and also now take a look at this German scientist's experiment again. And based on what you learned, complete part B as well. Okay, so that's your homework.